Big takeaways from preseason week number 1. We've seen every football team now in the NFL have an exhibition game. Our biggest takeaways, including some of those young developing quarterbacks. Coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL on the socials. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Become an everydayer. We love the everydayers. Subscribe on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. I want to start not with the quarterbacks, Matt. I want to start with the offensive linemen, the guys up front, because it has a big impact on how the quarterbacks play in the NFL. And I was watching the 49ers game, as I do, host of Locked On 49ers, by the way, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you're subscribed up. Find Matt doing Dynasty football. Probably a lot of takeaways from preseason football over there at Locked On Dynasty football as well.
Yeah.
Offensive line play was really bad in that football game for Trey Lance, and he didn't have a much of a chance at the beginning of the game to develop a rhythm. And then I remember seeing a couple other games where I felt the same way. And when you pair a young quarterback with, the second team offensive line in a lot of cases, it doesn't turn out well. And then I ran across this nugget from Warren Sharp, which provides some context to those quarterback performances in preseason week 1, talking about pressure rates and just astronomically high pressure rates for some of the quarterbacks in the league. I'm just going to name the quarterbacks that were 50% or higher pressure rate. So half of
that's a giant number, by the way.
Right. So Russell Wilson was pressured 64% of the time in his preseason week 1 game. He led the league. Next was Jake Browning, 63%. Jarrett Stidham, 59%. Nathan Rourke, who I don't know who that is, 53%. Because look, this is preseason football. Matt and I watched a lot of preseason football. We didn't watch every fourth quarter of every preseason game.
No.
We're not that sick. But we are sick individuals. 52% Tommy DeVito. Mason Rudolph, 50%.
Are you familiar with Tommy DeVito's work? I am not as well. I think he's Danny's son.
you almost had me sold on that for a second. I was like, oh, no. Acting could work out for me.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Chris Streveler, 50%. Gardner Minshew, 50% pressure rate. Brett Rippon, 50% pressure rate. Trey Lance, that I brought up, which made me think of this, 50% pressure rate. Jake Haener, 50%. Adrian Martinez, 50%. Stetson Bennett of the Rams, 49%. On and on and on and on and on. And you go down the list, Bryce Young, 43%. Will Levis, 42%. Neither one of them looked great in this game. And I'm going down. There's probably 25, 30 NFL quarterbacks that were above 30% pressure rate in preseason week number 1. So offensive line play behind defensive line play, just a big nugget of context while you evaluate the quarterbacks in some of these preseason games, especially young quarterbacks getting their first hint of real football where they can actually be hit and things are for real, full speed, where in practice, even when the pads come on, they're not quite full speed. So I think some of this might normalize as we get further on in the preseason. So don't make sweeping conclusions about young quarterbacks who are seeing their first action getting pressured over half of their dropbacks.
I think this is such a great place to start, as opposed to Bryce Young looked terrible, Trey Lance looked terrible. I mean, there's Russell Wilson looked terrible, blah, 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 blah. Because how often do we say on this show, and I can't stress it enough, I mean it to no end, the D linemen are better than the O linemen in the offense in the NFL. They just are. They're freakier. They're velociraptors. They're mako sharks. They're cheetahs. They're just nasty human beings. But also, to your point, O-line play takes longer. The protection schemes, I'm sure, are very basic. They're not game planning to double Max Crosby or Micah Parsons or even the fourth quarter version of that guy. If somebody's struggling, the coaches want to see it. Boy, your right tackle Always bring back the Steelers. Broderick Jones played the most snaps of all the Steelers in this game, and they didn't help him at all. Just you go be out there, learn the hard way. There's a lot of that going on.
And offensive linemen work more as a unit as well. So you see a lot of plays where a guy didn't necessarily get beat by the man in front of him, but what he did was he was supposed to slide right or slide left, and he slid right. And he thinks he's got help over there when he actually doesn't. And so it's the left guard sliding right because he thinks he has help, the left tackle, and you don't know which one made the mistake. They know in the coaching room and the meeting rooms, but watching the game, you don't know. But the offensive tackle stays left and blocks the guy off the edge. And so there's a defensive tackle that's running free, and defensive tackle right at the middle can ruin a play as quickly as anybody. And so you see a lot of that type of stuff. It's not even just about the offensive linemen individually playing bad and getting beat. They have got to play at a cohesive unit and have protection rules that sometimes they can get screwed up on top of everything else.
Really well said. Twists, stunts in live action in a stadium that you've never played in before. Linebacker blitzes, slot corners coming off the edge. I got him, you got him. It's too late now. The quarterback's under pressure. So there's definitely some of that. However, all those things add up. That's why. That's fine. But I listen to Mike Lombardi's podcast all the time, and he, talks about things through a GM's eyes. And he really believes when you go into preseason game number 1 and the preseason games as a whole, you better feel really confident as a GM in your number 1 offensive line and your number 2 offensive line. Otherwise, it's really hard to evaluate your offensive other players. How you value. Quarterbacks are obvious. Bryce Young's getting destroyed by the Jets defensive line. Did he hang in there? Yeah. But was he able to even execute the play often? Not really. So therefore, your running backs, your receivers, your tight ends, you can't evaluate them as well. And it's difficult. And the other thing about line play, and this was a big thing with Broderick Jones, who I brought up, the Steeler game was in 110 heat at kickoff. Those guys, they have to play every snap when the regular season rolls around. Your wide receivers can rotate, your edge guys can rotate, but your starting line in week 1 is going to play 100% of the snaps unless an injury happens. So you got to get them conditioned as well. That was a big thing with Broderick Jones. Leave him out there in the heat. See how the rookie first rounder holds up. So it's definitely harder and it'll get better, but it's a problem.
And it's not a surprise that almost all of these players, young players we're going to talk about, it's like, oh, they found the rhythm. They got a little bit better as the game went on.
Yeah.
And this is a lot of the reason why. And that's you brought up Bryce Young. Let's start with the number 1 pick in the NFL draft and the Jets-Panthers game. And this is a perfect example of what we're talking about. The New York Jets have been practicing a week longer than everybody else. They've already played a preseason game, and they looked much better, much more prepared, and much more in rhythm start to finish than the Panthers did, beating them 27-0. And, the scores don't matter in any of this, but we saw a young quarterback in Bryce Young. Things are probably going a million miles an hour for him. He's seeing his first full speed action in the NFL. And guess what? The team's he's playing against has already got their legs under him a little bit, has been practicing longer, and has already played a preseason game. And you saw that play out on the field. And so, give Bryce Young credit for at least hanging in there, and didn't play a ton, but 4 of 6 passing, 21 yards, very short, 3.5 yard average, did get sacked once, but overall you like that he hung in there, but didn't have much of a chance.
Great point about the teams that played the Hall of Fame game. At least first of all, they came to camp a week earlier than everybody else. They've been in a building playing against another team where some of these, Will McDonald, first round pick of the Jets, looked really good in the Hall of Fame game, looked really good in this game too. Had a sack. He had 5 pressures. So Carolina fans, I warn you not to get too down, because the Panthers O-line, I thought, was a strength, going into the season, but it's their first time, all the reasons we talked about to start the show, against as good a pass rush as there really is in the league. Way back when I did that, one of my Excel spreadsheets of who gets the most pressure and blitzes the least. The Jets were number 1 when you look at both, when you factor in the 4-man rush, or like per rusher, how many you get. So, and it's a rookie quarterback that doesn't recognize things well. So I wouldn't fret too much, but it was a bit of a tough watch for the first overall pick.
And you saw it on the other side with Zach Wilson, who took his lumps in preseason, the Hall of Fame game. He looked much better here. 14 of 20 passing, played a lot. 123 yards, a touchdown pass. So that's the big takeaway there with the offensive line. Let's see how these guys start to look week 2, week 3 of preseason, and things will settle down for them, I think, quite a bit. And you already saw things settle down for them as these games went on for players that played a lot. Real quick, last note on the Panthers. What do you think about, from a fantasy perspective, the receivers there? They went 3 wide to start, so the starters were Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, and the rookie Jonathan Mingo. I came away thinking, you know what? I think Adam Thielen might be the player to own here. He's not a high ceiling player, but I think he's a high floor player that might be targeted the most in this offense and might be worth rostering in your fantasy leagues.
I tend to agree. I think Hayden Hurst is a little bit sneaky because he's been around the block too, and he's a safe option for a rookie. You mentioned the Dynasty show that Ryan and I do. I've been stashing Mingo left and right. I'm a big believer, but as a rookie, I don't know. I think Thielen, you probably nailed it. I mean, he's a leadoff walk. You know, he's not exciting, but you'll take it.
And Terrace Marshall was the next guy up, and he's a pretty good player too. So I'm really interested to see how that all works out and who ends up getting targets. Is probably a team you want to stay away from. But I came away just thinking, Adam Thielen's going to be the first read on a lot of routes.
You're probably right. I'm not a big DJ Chark believer, so that's good.
It's feast or famine. He's not going to He's not going to be a volume player for you at all.
100%.
Next, we are going to talk about some other young quarterbacks around the league. Our takeaways from preseason week number 1. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. August is here, and you know what that means. It is officially fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. I'm already in my, 3rd, 4th Best Ball draft. You can go fast draft, 30 seconds between picks. You can go slow drafts where there's 8 to 10 hours in between picks. Matt, how many Best Ball drafts have you done so far?
At least a dozen. Yeah.
I love it. And all you do with Best Ball Draft, super fun this time of year. You do one live snake draft. There's no waivers, no trades. You don't have to worry about setting your lineup at all throughout the season. Underdog sets your best lineup every week. Whatever your top scoring lineup would have been, it is automatically set. You don't add players. You don't lose players. You draft your team, and that is it. So try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back and even bigger with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner drafted their team in July, so don't wait around. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them on the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. I want to go to, let's stay with the NFL draft theme here, and Anthony Richardson and the Indianapolis Colts here. A few takeaways from this game, the Colts and the Buffalo Bills. And first of all, Demar Hamlin getting into the game for the first time since he had his cardiac arrest last season in that Bengals game. And so the big takeaway, we saw it on, Thursday night when John Metchie, who battled leukemia last year, got on the field for the first time. Demar Hamlin back on the field, being involved with, tackling somebody, and you kind of hold your breath. You see that first contact he makes. And, just a shoe-in already for comeback player of the year just to see him on the field. So great stories. John Metchie, Demar Hamlin, I wanted to call those out before we got too far.
Yeah, there is a personal, human element to all this, and that's just absolutely tremendous. And hey, I, as well as everyone listening, is rooting for Hamlin to go on to have a really good career and be an impact player. And I also have meant to say this for months. People were down on how the Bills season ended, and Josh Allen fought through a bad elbow injury to end the year. But imagine this happening to your teammate and trying to go win the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? Like, people forget these things. And do you think that helped the Bills season? Boy, the Bills are losers. They can't win the Super Bowl. It's like, did you realize what they just dealt with? And to bring it back to a really business angle, and I hate to do this because I don't think it'll apply for him, but there's not even a guarantee this young man makes the team. Like what a story it'll be if he gets cut. That's the NFL is just so brutal. That's all I mean. I'm not talking anything about Hamlin. I'm rooting for him. He's a Pitt guy. He's a Pittsburgh guy. It doesn't matter where he's from, but he might get cut. This league is brutal.
Anthony Richardson, what were your thoughts on him? Again, one of these players, he started very slow, had an interception. The numbers don't look great, 7 of 12, 67 yards with the pick. He didn't get sacked in this game. Gardner Minshew was one of the players that was 50% pressure rate. Anthony Richardson able to avoid that pressure a little bit more than Minshew did against the Colts. And I know that offensive line is a little work in progress, even though it's a really good offensive line. And one of the players that had a rough game was a rookie right tackle, Blake Freeland, who I liked coming out of the draft. But he struggled a little bit in this game too. At right tackle, he was playing with the number one group. Blake Freeland was. So again, some offensive line play that wasn't ideal. But Anthony Richardson started slow, but kind of picked up the pace a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Minshew. Minshew looked like there's a handful of those type of dudes, Baker Mayfield, Minshew, et cetera, that have been around the block that aren't great players, but showed that they can handle these situations. They've played a lot of preseason reps.
In all these games, sorry to interrupt, Matt, in all these games, we saw it with Darnold and the 49ers and even Brandon Allen, the third string guy in this game for the 49ers. And around the league, Davis Mills versus CJ Stroud, the veteran player looked a lot more comfortable, which you should expect.
Again, so the Colts fans, don't be like, oh, we better start Minshew in week one. These are just the growing pains everyone deals with, and Richardson was almost exactly like you expected. I mean, he threw a bad pick early, but he's really mentally tough and physically tough and hung around and kept getting better and better. There were throws that were errant, to say the least. I mean, were high and off balance or high and wide or whatever, and hit the mascot type throws here and there. But he also made tremendous plays, and his presence on the field is undeniable. I mean, like watching Cam Newton back in the day or Josh Allen just get on the field and be their physical presence amongst other unbelievable athletes. Richardson has all that and maybe more. I mean, he is so big and powerful, and it's different watching him in Florida, but I mean, when you get to see him the first time in a Colts uniform, you're like, man, wow.
A couple other players that stood out to me in this game. Rookie receiver for the Colts, Josh Downs, couple of catches, 29 yards. And then on the other side, I've been really impressed by Khalil Shakir, who's a 5th-round pick by the Bills. What was it, last year or the year before? He had a couple catches for 25 yards. He's sudden in and out of his breaks. I think he could start to creep in and get a little target share for Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. So that's a name to remember. Maybe, deep fantasy leagues, possibly someone to stash for you.
I like both those guys. Great call on Shakir. I mean, they went out and got Kincaid in the first round and going to use him a lot in the slot. And I've always kind of thought to myself, why don't you just bump up Shakir's usage? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying instead of, but maybe in addition to. So maybe these middle of the field guys that are very different can be really helpful for Allen. And that's kind of what Downs is too. I'm glad you brought him. He's a slot that's, is much different than the receivers that Colts have.
Mm-hmm. We got to talk about the young quarterbacks and some big stories with both the teams we cover, Matt, the Steelers and the 49ers. You can listen to Locked On 49ers if you want the long version. I'll give you the short version of what Trey Lance looked like and Sam Darnold with the 49ers in week one. And I talked a little bit about it at the beginning. Lance was under pressure a lot, especially early. And when he wasn't under pressure, things looked like they were not processing very quickly for him. He threw a couple of bad passes that could have been intercepted that weren't, in fact, his touchdown pass in this game, the only score the 49ers had in this game. And they were beat pretty soundly and did not look as prepared as the Las Vegas Raiders. And apparently in the joint practices, the Raiders won a lot of those, and Jimmy G outdueled all the other quarterbacks. So that was an interesting storyline locally with Jimmy G now in Las Vegas. But even the touchdown pass Lance threw could have been picked off. It went off the hands of a Raider and ended up in tight end Ross Dwelly's hands for a touchdown. So not a great day for Lance. He did get better and kind of found a rhythm as the first half went on, and he played the entire first half. And again, that's what Lance needs the most. And then, I mean, it's kind of unfair to have a guy who's played as much football as Sam Darnold, another former number 3 pick, to be playing in the third quarter of the first preseason game, right? And he looked like more of a veteran, looked better from the start. He made some bad throws, but made a lot of good throws as well. And I thought maybe Brandon Allen, who was playing in the fourth quarter, and he was probably a guy that started this game last year in preseason week number 1, looked better than both of them. Really decisive, got the ball out quick, was hitting his running back in the back of the head who hadn't turned around his head, didn't turn his head quick enough. And he did have an intercepted ball that went right through a receiver's hands. So the later in the game it got, the better the quarterbacks looked in the 49ers game. And I would say Lance looked the worst out of all of them, and he's got to look a lot better to whether he's auditioning for his current team or his next team.
Interesting. And so you're going to give me, do you want the Steelers Bucks recap here real quick, or are we going to get a break?
On the other side, I want to talk Justin Fields and his very, very interesting performance in preseason week 1 as well. Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Football season, it's getting ready to kick off for the regular season, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. How about this bet at FanDuel? Right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time that team wins a game in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus points for every victory. And you can use those bonus points as the season goes along on spreads, player props, over-unders, tons more. I love building parlays at FanDuel. The website is super easy to use, as is the app. Safe. When you win, you get paid as well, which is always very nice for an app. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets right away with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. All right, give us the Kenny Pickett report. You talked about Broderick Jones a little bit on the offensive line, the Steelers' first-round pick. How did year 2 Kenny Pickett look? Did he look more like the young quarterback or more like the veteran version that we've talked about today?
So I need some context for this game. I mentioned the heat. It was the second hottest game in the history of the Steelers organization. It was like 110 at kickoff. Insane. Like my buddies that were like sideline reporters were like melting, like they were Frosty the Snowman. But anyway, so Baker Mayfield played really well. Kind of mentioned that before. Good for him. But the rest of this Bucs team, the Steelers' opponent, was about as easy as opponent as you could ever see. Like, think about the Bucs. Like, they went all in for Brady and all those guys, and they won their Super Bowl. Now they have ungodly amounts of dead money, and they have what, 8 to 10 good players remaining, and they sat all those guys. So the Bucs middle class is junk. You know, they got the stars, Evans, Vea, those type of dudes, but the middle class is really bad because they can't pay for those guys. And Tampa scored 10 points really, really late in the game when scrubs were in. But basically the Steelers utterly dominated them because they basically played their first team offense just for a series. Kenny went down, tore them apart. But Pickens had a big play after the catch, middle of the field. That's stuff we haven't seen before. So Pickett looks very, very much in command, but I warned Steeler fans over and over, this was as bad an opponent as you could see, and they had like a dozen penalties for like 160 yards too. But real impressive on both sides of the ball from the Steelers. I think it's going to be a long year for the Bucs, but it'll get better when their stars come back.
How about my guy Calvin Austin III? Ooh, didn't have a rookie season for the Steelers last year. He flashed a little bit in this one.
He's been flashing at camp too. I mean, that was his first time ever being in an NFL stadium because he got injured in camp last year. Ridiculously fast, jet sweep stuff, but he's not just a gimmick guy. I mean, he lines up in the slot, he lines up outside. He's going to challenge Allen Robinson as the third receiver, and they're just very different. They'll probably be more situational.
Mm-hmm. And as a return guy as well, I'd imagine.
Punt returner.
Interesting. Okay, and let's move on to the Chicago Bears. And by the way, you know what? Because I don't want to forget, I want to congratulate John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens for their 26th, Matt. 26th straight preseason victory for John Harbaugh, narrowly edging out the Eagles 20-19 in preseason week number 1. They started slow, so they had to come back in this one as well.
Yeah, I thought they might be in trouble on this one. One thing I found interesting, though, is Huntley didn't start. And if they're changing the offense dramatically, Josh Johnson got the start. Is Huntley no longer the number 2? Is he no longer a real fit in this offense? Is it more of a Josh Johnson, slightly more traditional type? That was the one note I took from that one. I didn't see a lot of that game. But I also find it interesting that they care so much about preseason. I mean, it's working for them. That's cool. but I really hope for their sake somebody doesn't get injured trying to get the record or whatever.
Yeah, and you just kind of feel bad for a guy like Melvin Gordon, who's playing way too deep into a preseason one game based on what his career has been. But yeah, hey, I don't know. You play to win. There's something to that, I guess. I don't know. As long as you're not having any big time injuries, we saw it with J.K. Dobbins a couple years ago. That could backfire real quick.
I mean, I guess it's the right message. I mean, winning is contagious in a good way, but it scares me a little.
Yeah, really excited to see what that offense looks like.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And the Chicago Bears, Justin Fields, right away finding his new toy, who is DJ Moore, for a 60-yard catch and run. And how about this box score, this line for Justin Fields, who I got to pull it up because I lost it, but it was 3 of 3 passing was Justin Fields for 120. Let's see where I gotta find it. 100 and gosh dang it! All right,
I got it here.
Oh, you got it. Okay, good.
129 yards on 3 completions, 2 touchdowns, perfect passer rating, 56-yarder to Khalil Herbert, 62-yarder to DJ Moore. Like, yeah, I'll take it.
43-yard average per completion, 3 of 3 passing for Justin Fields, and a total of, I think, negative air yards on those passes. That's what I love about it too, because it was a wide receiver screen to DJ Moore. He did all the work. He scrambled left, found Herbert, who scampered 50-something yards. And so those were the 2 touchdown passes. And so it's not so much, oh man, look at the line. Justin Fields, he's arrived because he was 3 of 3 and got the ball out quicker. No, it's that he has people helping him out now. So he doesn't have to play throw ball and do everything. So that was my big takeaway there, is like other guys doing the work for him. And that allow him to just take the easy stuff. And I'm excited for what that Bears team looks like after talking with Lauren Cox as well of Locked On Bears to end last week.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad that it looks like Herbert's clearly the number 1 back. DJ Moore is obviously the number 1 receiver. That's a huge help. We did talk a lot of O-line stuff with them. And again, the box score is way better than what Fields was asked to do. But that's the great takeaway, is he doesn't have to do everything this time around, you would hope. So good stuff. Played 2 series, did exactly what you wanted. Very encouraging.
How about the quarterbacks on the other side? They let Will Levis and Malik Willis handle the entire game. And looking at the line and watching some of this game, neither one of them looked very good. The question with Willis is, how much better did he look last year? Because he looked completely lost as a rookie. He was 16 of 25 passing, 189 yards, no touchdowns, an interception, sacked 4 times. Will Levis also sacked 4 times, 9 of 14 passing for 85 yards and no touchdowns and an interception. So equally poor lines for both of those quarterbacks.
Yeah, Levis made a few throws. Okay. Willis looks kind of like he did as a rookie, which is encouraging. Both of them held the ball too long behind a bad offensive line too. Like that's tough on these guys too, is learning how to get the ball out quickly in an NFL, scenario.
So that's our biggest takeaways. Matt, do you have any more before we go? I'm out of notes. Those are the main notes I wanted to make sure we covered here from preseason week number 1. Again, I don't have deep notes into the fourth quarter of every single one of these games, but there was a lot of fun players to watch and see some guys in new uniforms for the first time.
I'm sure I'm forgetting some notes, but that's probably a good way to tease the Thursday show too. If there's somebody you want us to talk about on Thursday, you could tweet us now and we can get into it. I mean, Deuce Vaughn comes to mind. We always talked about how little he is, but he had a really good game for the Cowboys. So that was kind of noteworthy. I watched a fair amount of Raiders Chiefs yesterday, and Derek Carr's fitting in really well and looked very, very sharp. And I think that's noteworthy because it's a new team. I mean, not noteworthy that a starter's playing well, but
right. Well, and Derek Carr, one of the few starters. Fields, Carr, Pickett, some of the few teams that actually put their number 1 quarterbacks out there in preseason week 1.
Yep, and you like to see them look like it, So, I real quick. I mean, let's wrap this up, but I would imagine next week we see the most name brand guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every team's done this a little differently, as we see in week 1. Some teams didn't care at all about the preseason game. Some teams had their number ones out there. Preseason week 2, I think we're going to see a lot of teams treat it as their main get ready game and have their ones out there the most. And I think some then treat preseason week 3 like they used to treat preseason week number 4. And I think the opposite is true of the other teams, where they're going to have their number ones out there more for preseason week number 3 and just treat it as 1, 2, and 3 always were, and just not have one that they treated like preseason game number 4.
Mm-hmm. So not only is there only 3 preseason games, but there is that break after the third one over Labor Day weekend where there's no football at all. So I think this is still a feeling out process of every coach is kind of looking at it a little bit differently.
Yep, and it's less opportunity for those guys to fight for those last spots and those practice squad spots. And I think it's probably easier for teams to hide players and stash players on the practice squad because they don't have that 4th preseason game where someone might stand out and catch the eye of another GM that needs a 53rd man that might, snag you off of waivers. I think it's a lot easier to get guys through waivers this year. And the cut down day is all at once this year too. So everyone's going on the waivers at the same time rather than before when they would have, the tiered cut system.
I used to do the pro personnel side, with the Browns, and I can't imagine what a flood that is that day. Oh my God, there's 7 guards that might be better than our worst guard. What do we want them or not? Pick them up. I don't know. It must be just bonkers. And I think you said that perfectly. I think there's also bigger practice squads since COVID. I think it is easier to keep your own after they get cut.
At BD Peacock, at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Drop a question in the comments on YouTube if you want to get involved in our weekly mailbag. What teams, what players do you want to hear about from preseason football? And of course, Matt and I have you covered every day for the entire league right here. Peacock and Williamson.